Hello my loves and welcome back to my channel.
And told Floyd that he might be able to get him out with a rope, but that the foot that was caught might come off in the attempt. Completely defeated at this point, and maybe a little bit delirious, Floyd just said, "Pull my foot off, but just get me out of here." And rightfully so. Pulling Floyd out of the cave would definitely break his foot, if not remove it entirely, and he might bleed out before reaching the surface. However, running out of options and 79 hours into Floyd's ordeal at this point, Homer, William, and Robert descended into the cave with a special harness and a 100-foot rope. When they reached him, they gave him some whiskey and some sedatives to calm him down before the pull. They strapped him in and knotted the rope, and on Homer's count, the rope went tight. Floyd began screaming as his body was bent around the angle of the pit. His screams echoed through the cave as the men pulled, but Floyd didn't move. Fearing for his brother's life, Homer had had enough and began pulling the opposite direction and actually managed to pull the rope from the other men. The screaming stopped, and Floyd lay limp on the cave floor. He hadn't moved a single inch. The team decided to leave the cave and reevaluate. Everyone was severely shaken by the experience, and Homer would even need to be carried out of the cave. Outside of the cave, there was only one person left who stood a chance at rescuing Floyd, and this was his childhood friend, Johnny Gerald. When Johnny first heard about Floyd, he didn't think much of it.
Yo, this is so complex. I mean, this is... The man stayed trapped for 48 hours. And he's trapped below his waist. He's in a cave that is so inaccessible. Nobody had the talent that Floyd had to actually get in the cave. Okay, so maybe, maybe it is going to end well, okay? So let's just keep that in mind. Okay?
Because he knew that if anyone could get unstuck, it would be his friend, Floyd Collins. After 2 days, and Floyd was still stuck, Johnny started getting worried and took a visit to Sand Cave. He reached the entrance to find that the crowd had grown to over 200 people, nearly all of which were drunk, and almost none had any caving experience. Disgusted by the spectacle it had become, Johnny pushed his way past and slipped into the cave. When he finally reached within earshot of Floyd, Floyd was ecstatic to hear his voice and for the first time in days, felt some hope of being rescued. Johnny was a stocky man compared to the others and wasn't able to squeeze down the final descent into the pit. He first had to spend about 3 hours removing rocks in order to even get to Floyd. When he got down to him at around midnight, he started removing the gravel around Floyd's body. Another 6 hours later, Johnny had managed to enlarge the opening where Floyd was to uncover his torso, his hips, and his upper thighs. And for the first time since being trapped, Floyd was able to start to wiggle around. After finally being too exhausted to continue, Johnny would leave his friend in the cave with the promise to not let anyone else but his team into the cave. The men were worried that although they were well-intentioned, less experienced rescuers might cause a cave-in. The following evening, the game plan was to form a chain of men to pass food, equipment, and rocks up and down the passageway like an assembly line. The passageways would also be reinforced with boards to reduce the risk of a cave-in. Thanks to Johnny and Homer, the smallest of the group, William, was able to crouch in the pit and reach past Floyd's body towards his legs in order to remove the rocks further in. When they got far enough, they would try to wedge a crowbar against the rock and then use a jack to lift the stone off of Floyd's foot.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there weren't any jacks that were the right size for the job, and so they went with one that was too small and then would use wood blocks against the cave ceiling to brace against the jack. Shortly before midnight, they began expanding the jack, but almost immediately it shifted to one side and slipped loose. William repositioned the jack and started opening it once again, and the jack pressed into the boards as the tension increased and the rock began to tremble. Floyd cried out to keep turning as William focused intensely on the rock, and with each turn of the jack, he felt a surge of adrenaline as the stone continued to shift. But the block slipped once again and the jack fell out of place. William went on to try over and over, adding blocks, removing blocks, adjusting the angle, adjusting the jack. All the while, Floyd was encouraging William, but unfortunately, at around 1 a.m., he collapsed from exhaustion. Before leaving that night, the men adjusted Floyd's blankets and wrapped a light bulb around his neck for warmth. They left the cave that night with purple and bruised hands, exhausted and defeated. The following day, another new face took charge of the rescue, a man named Henry Carmichael of the Kentucky Rock Asphalt Company. Given his line of work, he had the necessary experience to stabilize the supports in the cave and widen it more safely. He sent 2 men into Sand Cave to assess the structural stability, and they would have an easy time for the first 100 feet or so due to all the widening. But as they went further into the cave and the supports grew less frequent, they noticed something horrifying. The warmth outside of the cave due to all the fires and the warmth of the rescuers inside of the cave had caused the temperature and moisture level inside the cave to rise. Near the final squeeze, large cracks had formed and the ceiling was beginning to droop. One of the men suggested leaving immediately, but the other desperately wanted to reach Floyd. By the time they reached him and spoke to him, the other man was practically begging him to turn back. It looked as though the passageway was closing in by the second.
What?
118 hours into the rescue, the men were confident they could use a blowtorch to burn away 2 of the rocks that had preventing the jack from being placed in the right position. William entered the cave as he had done dozens of times in the last few days, but quickly came up on a wall of orange-gray rocks. The cave had collapsed. He tried to move some of the rocks, but each one that moved caused more rocks to fall from the ceiling. Rocks were also falling all around him and behind him, almost blocking him in. He managed to squeeze back around them, but he was now scared of also becoming trapped. He returned to the surface, nose bleeding, and told everyone that it was now too dangerous to enter Sand Cave. The last man from this team to enter the cave would be Johnny Gerald. Over the next 8 hours, he went into Sand Cave at least 5 times to reinforce the walls and to remove rocks. On one occasion, Floyd could hear Johnny get close to the pit and ask for some food, but Johnny would tell Floyd about the cave-in. When he heard the terrible news, Floyd began to cry. Motivated by the gut-wrenching sobbing of his trapped friend, Johnny continued to tirelessly remove rocks from the pile and would actually finally manage to see light coming from the other side, coming from the bulb around Floyd's neck. At 10:30 p.m. on February 4th, Johnny would enter Sand Cave for the final time. He squeezed through the tunnels and crawled through the mud with the hopes of coating Floyd's legs with Vaseline to slide him out. As he approached the cave-in, he was shocked to see that no light came through anymore. The cave had collapsed once again. He stared motionless at the pile for over 15 minutes and then began to yell. He called for Floyd over and over until a rock came down from the ceiling and landed on his head. He called out again, and then another heavier rock landed right on his back. 15 minutes later, Johnny left the cave and would not re-enter. On Tuesday, February 5th, 142 hours into the rescue, the state of Kentucky assumed control of the rescue. A team of engineers and miners were assembled outside of the cave with the goal of creating a...
I don't understand this. Why does it take you so much time? Like the specialists come after a million years. Yes, the cave already caved in. Yeah, don't worry. Like, we're gonna come in here right now. We're gonna fix this thing right now. Honey, where were you when it was beginning? This is the millionth time that actually people that had the apparatus and the things to actually save somebody, and they didn't. Like, hold on a second. They were from Kentucky. Let me go back a little bit.
On Tuesday, February 5th, 142 hours into the rescue, the state of Kentucky assumed control of the rescue. A team of engineers and miners were assembled outside of the cave with the goal of creating a shaft parallel to Floyd, which would then be used to dig horizontally once they got down deep enough. Geologists were brought in to survey the ground, trees were cut down, rocks were removed, and equipment was brought in to dig. However, all of the machinery would prove to be useless. Tests showed that the fumes would fill the cave and kill Floyd before ever reaching him. At hour 146, men began digging the 55-foot shaft with picks and shovels. Approximately 75 volunteers worked to remove soil with the hope of dredging up 2 feet of soil per hour. If they worked at that pace, they would reach Floyd in about 30 hours. The first ton was removed easily, and the diggers were already down to 10 feet. At 15 feet, the shaft narrowed, and the shovels began to run into boulders. A system of buckets and pulleys worked to remove debris as fast as possible, but the pace slowed to just 6 inches per hour. At hour 30, when they initially expected to reach Floyd, the shaft was only 17 feet deep. Locals and men who had worked before the state got involved watched helplessly from the sidelines. At hour 228, tarps had to be set up above the shaft to prevent rain from getting in, but that didn't stop pools of water from forming at the bottom of the shaft. Towards the end of Sunday, the shaft reached a depth of 25 feet and the pace of digging slowed to only 4 inches an hour. At this pace, Monday went by, and then Tuesday went by, and then on Wednesday at hour 288, the rain turned into snow and the water and mud began to freeze. At hour 360, a depth of 55 feet was finally reached and the order was given to burrow sideways into Sand Cave. At hour 411, after 17 days trapped underground, 12 without food or water, and 4 without any heat from the light bulb that had burned out, there was no hope left from the group. At 1:30 p.m. on Monday, February 16th, a chisel finally entered Sand Cave. Workers frantically removed rocks to widen the hole, and finally a rescuer named Ed Brenner flashed a light into Sand Cave. He looked into the cave and saw a glimmer. Floyd Collins had a gold tooth and it was shimmering in the light, but it did not move. He turned around to look at the group and shook his head and said, "Floyd Collins is dead." The coroner would later claim that Floyd had been dead for approximately 3 days, and if this is accurate, Floyd died only 1 day after his light bulb finally went out. The following morning, with the shaft walls buckling in, officials decided that it was too dangerous to remove Floyd from Sand Cave. For the next 8 months, Homer Collins toured stages across the country telling crowds stories about his brother's childhood. Ever since his brother was declared dead, Homer had vowed to get him out, but didn't have enough money to fund an excavation. On April 17th, he had finally raised enough money, and 7 miners redug the shaft and re-entered Sand Cave. This time, they entered from in behind Floyd's body and finally removed the rock that pinned his leg and caused his death. It weighed just 27 pounds. And finally, on April 26, 1925, Floyd Collins was lowered into a grave in the family cemetery. A stalagmite headstone marks his plot. If you made it this far, I just wanted to thank you for watching.
It's really, really crazy how much time it passed for the state to actually get involved. I'm really thankful that they were actually able to pull him out and to actually give him a good final rest, you know. And I think that, you know, it was good that he had his brother and his good friend with him in the final moments, and that those 2 people never gave up on him. And I'm glad that his brother also raised the money to actually pull him out. I think that was so heroic. And, you know, the man really was the best cave explorer, hands down. So, being the end of the video, if you've liked it, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up, to comment down below, and to subscribe so you can be a part of our family. And I will see you in my next video. Bye bye. It's like, come on.